to let him get away with it, would you? If it was Charlie, I don't think so. Hey, you!
Ryan, what the hell's going on?
For 20 years, Kevin Kennedy played one of Coronation Street's most beloved characters. But behind Curly Watts' signature glasses and unlucky in love storylines, the actor was hiding a devastating secret that nearly cost him everything. This is the true story of why Curly Watts left Coronation Street and the battle Kevin Kennedy fought to save his own life. 20 years on Coronation Street meant Kevin Kennedy appeared in over 1,500 episodes between July of '83 and September of 2003, making Curly Watts one of the longest-serving characters in the show's history.
Shouldn't you be at school right now?
I'm off sick today.
Sick? Not too sick to get through this lot, though. Hey.
Straight hair gave him his ironic nickname, oversized glasses became his trademark, and his perpetually hopeless romantic life turned him into the lovable underdog that millions of viewers rooted for week after week. What started as a job collecting rubbish evolved into managing a supermarket, and eventually Curly even became a local councillor. But his relationships really captured the nation's attention.
My lawful wedded husband.
December of '95 brought the wedding that stopped Britain. 22 million people tuned in to watch Curly marry the dizzy but lovable Raquel Woolstenholme, and that number isn't an exaggeration. To put that in perspective, the entire population of the Netherlands is smaller than the number of people who sat down to watch these two unlikely lovers tie the knot. Curly and Raquel, played by the brilliant Sarah Lancashire, became one of soap's most iconic couples because their romance worked on every level. The awkward intellectual falling for the naive dreamer struck a chord with audiences across the country. And when Raquel left less than a year later to pursue opportunities abroad, 20 million people watched her departure.
Go home to bed until you are in full possession of all your faculties.
Only if you come with me.
Oh!
The first day of the new millennium brought Raquel back for one special episode. She revealed she'd had Curly's daughter and needed a divorce. And that episode became Coronation Street's first ever two-hander, featuring only Sarah Lancashire and Kevin Kennedy for the entire 45 minutes. But while Curly Watts was winning hearts on screen, Kevin Kennedy was losing his private battle off screen. What Kennedy later described as being a maintenance drinker consumed his life throughout the 90s. Getting drunk and causing scenes wasn't his style. Staying at what he called a steady level of inebriation at all times was how he survived each day, and nobody around him knew the truth.
We've got a right to listen to music.
And I've got a right to go to sleep!
Well, we're not stopping you.
Shots of rum in his morning coffee started every day, followed by a bottle of vodka before heading to the Coronation Street set. Secret drinking in his dressing room got him through filming, and 3 bottles of wine each evening finished the cycle. Kennedy admitted years later that he knew his drinking wasn't normal. Other people didn't drink in the morning, didn't cancel plans because they couldn't get a drink, and didn't choose holidays based solely on where they could drink the most. But he couldn't stop. Waking up in New York City with absolutely no memory of flying there from Manchester showed him how bad things had become. But still, he continued. Playing Curly was the perfect job for me, Kennedy revealed years later, because when I was performing, I was someone else. Years passed while he maintained this double life. On screen, the bumbling, lovable Curly struggled through failed relationships and workplace mishaps, while behind the scenes, Kennedy struggled to make it through each day without his colleagues discovering the truth. Managing a few scenes before lunch was possible if he wasn't too shaky, and the performance became everything that mattered. Friday, the 14th of August, 1998, changed everything. Another crippling hangover greeted Kennedy that morning, along with only hazy memories of the night before. His car keys had vanished, and as he staggered through his Manchester flat, he realized his wife Claire had walked out on him. Work at Coronation Street was waiting, but that wasn't his biggest concern anymore. The clock was ticking down to the moment when, if he didn't get a drink, everything would go wrong. Rushing to an off-license while threatening to jump out of the moving car showed his desperation. Half a bottle went down in one go, but relief didn't come. What happened next, while shopping, terrified him. Kennedy suffered what he described as a massive blackout cum stroke and came to in an ambulance, scared in a way he'd never experienced before. Something bad was coming if he carried on, and he finally understood that truth. Arriving at the Coronation Street studios that day, inebriated and broken, Kennedy found himself unable to leave his car. Pinned to his seat by a feeling he couldn't quite understand, he sat frozen while the show's producer came out to try coaxing him from the vehicle. Years of holding everything together ended with a sudden and unexpected collapse, and in that moment, the secret was finally out. What happened next changed everything, and here's why it matters. Late 90s employers had a standard playbook for dealing with certain problems and mental health issues, and that playbook was simple. Fire the problem, move on, replace them quickly. Coronation Street could have done exactly that, terminating Kennedy's contract and replacing Curly Watts with minimal disruption to their production schedule. They chose differently. Coronation Street's bosses sent Kennedy to the famous Priory Clinic instead of showing him the door. This decision was bold for its time because it represented a new direction for how employers could handle such problems in the workplace, and Kennedy credits this choice with saving his life. What makes this intervention even more remarkable is understanding what Kennedy's daily consumption looked like. Up to 4 bottles each day meant his body was physically dependent on it, and stopping suddenly could have killed him. The Priory gave him medical supervision during withdrawal, therapy to address the underlying causes of his problem, and tools to maintain sobriety once he left. Kennedy completed 2 rounds at the beginning of his recovery journey, looking at people who were 6 months sober or a year sober and wondering if he'd ever reach those milestones. Denise Welch, Kennedy's Coronation Street co-star, benefited directly from his recovery. Kennedy led her to Alcoholics Anonymous after recognizing the signs of dependencies in her behavior, and she went on to achieve her own successful recovery. Helping others became part of Kennedy's program almost immediately, and that pattern of service continues today. Understanding his trigger points and knowing where it's not safe for him to go keeps Kennedy protected. Touring can be hard. Being away from home presents challenges, and he stays vigilant by attending AA meetings wherever he travels. Without their intervention, he believes he wouldn't be here today, and he's probably right. Sobriety came in 1998 and never left. 25 years and counting represents a remarkable achievement that Kennedy maintains through regular AA meetings, reading recovery literature, and understanding his trigger points. Recovery allowed him to return to Coronation Street after a short break, and Claire came back to him as well. They've remained happily married ever since, proving that rebuild was possible. Kennedy continued playing Curly Watts for another 5 years after getting sober, showing that recovery and career success could coexist. But May of 2003 brought news that shocked Coronation Street fans across the country. 20 years of service ended when Kevin Kennedy got axed from the show. A source speaking to the Sun newspaper explained that the backroom team had been split for a while over the usefulness of Curly's character after 21 years on the street. Time was up, and the decision got made. Kennedy, perhaps eager to maintain his public image and professional reputation, publicly called the decision mutual and stated that he'd been wanting to take time to pursue exciting new projects. Spreading his wings after so long in the same role sounded reasonable, but the truth was different. Kennedy got axed, plain and simple. The door stayed open for a potential return, but producers made the decision to end his time as Curly Watts. September of 2003 brought Curly's departure in a storyline that tied up his character's life neatly. Emma, his wife, who worked as a police officer, had committed perjury to protect a colleague who'd assaulted a local resident. Emma's background as part of an armed response unit added complexity to her character and to Curly's life. She'd stormed Fresco during a siege at the supermarket where Curly worked and took out one of the perpetrators, Dean Sykes, who had taken several bystanders hostage. Living with someone who'd had to take someone out in the line of duty and then lied under oath to protect a colleague showed Curly's world growing darker and more complicated. The ultra-honest man who'd spent his career managing a supermarket and his hobby stargazing through a telescope in his loft found himself married to someone whose job involved life and death decisions he couldn't fully understand. Boxing Day of 2001 brought the birth of their son Ben at number 7 Coronation Street, delivered with help from neighbor Norris Cole. They named the baby Ben as a tribute to Norris, whose middle name it was, and Norris became Ben's godfather. That family moment represented the height of Curly's happiness, balancing his role as a new father with his duties as an elected councillor. 2 years later, all of it would be gone when they moved to Newcastle, and eventually, even the marriage itself would fail. Friction developed between the ultra-honest Curly and his wife because of her lies, and when Emma received a promotion and transfer to Newcastle, Curly initially refused to go with her. Changing his mind came at the last minute, because staying with Emma and their young son Ben mattered more than anything else. The family packed up and left for a new life up north, giving Curly a quiet ending after 2 decades on the show. No dramatic death came, no scandal erupted, just a move to Newcastle for family reasons. Curly Watts was gone, and September of 2003 marked the end of an era. Busy years followed Kennedy's Coronation Street departure because he'd gotten sober 5 years before leaving the show. Health, energy, and readiness for new challenges defined this period of his life. Back in 2000, he'd already released a single called Bulldog Nation with his band Bunch of Thieves, which reached number 70 on the UK singles chart. His album, Present Kennedy, earned a gold record for sales and took him as far as Australia and New Zealand, proving his musical talents extended beyond the cobbles. Theatre became Kennedy's new home in 2009 when he took on the role of Pop, an aging hippie, in the Queen-inspired musical We Will Rock You. Playing this character for approximately 5 years meant joining the West End production at London's Dominion Theatre and later performing in various touring iterations of the show. 2015 brought performances aboard Royal Caribbean's Anthem of the Seas cruise ship, and his final performances as Pop came in February of 2024, with shows departing from New Jersey and sailing through the Caribbean. Rock of Ages gave Kennedy another major role when he played Dennis Dupree, and he starred in productions of Chicago and the musical version of Fat Friends as well. Performing, which had been his escape during his drinking years, became his joy in sobriety. The sense of accomplishment that I feel from performing, he explained, is better than any drug or booze I've experienced in my life. Television appearances came here and there after Coronation Street. Playing a David Bowie tribute act on BBC's Holby City filled 2017, and Christmas Day of 2019 brought an appearance as an angel in Mrs. Brown's Boys. These were one-off roles, though. Nothing compared to the sustained work he'd enjoyed on Coronation Street for 2 decades. Guest work kept Kennedy visible even without a regular series anchoring his schedule. Musical talent that predated his acting career came back into focus during these years, and his history reveals something fascinating. At 14 years old, Kennedy played in a band called Paris Valentinos alongside 2 teenagers who would go on to form half of one of Britain's most influential bands. Johnny Marr and Andy Rourke were his bandmates in those early days, and they later joined Morrissey to form The Smiths. Kennedy didn't give much credence to the band at the time, but reading Johnny Marr's book years later taught him that Marr thought Paris Valentinos were actually quite good. Musical connections extended beyond his youth. Simon Cowell signed Kennedy to BMG label through Arista Records, and performing alongside legends like Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson followed. Country music became a passion, and his band, Bunch of Thieves, played major festivals, including Reading and Break for the Border. Contributing vocals to the 2010 compilation album, Coronation Street Rogues, Angels, Heroes and Fools brought Kennedy together with other former cast members and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra for the soap's 50th anniversary celebration. Family connections to music run deep in Kennedy's life. His uncle played with Shep's Banjo Boys, 4 of his family members were in brass bands, and his cousin is Stefan Kusch, frontman of folk rockers, The Men They Couldn't Hang. Another cousin is Chris Hook from the 60s group Temperance 7. Music wasn't just a hobby for Kennedy, it was woven into his family's DNA, and that foundation gave him somewhere solid to land when Coronation Street ended. Recovery work hasn't taken a back seat either. Kennedy and his wife Claire co-founded the Kennedy Street Foundation, a Brighton-based charity offering free support to anyone looking to recover from certain dependencies. A telephone advice, home-based detox support, and signposting to local recovery services form the core of their work. Professional advice and coaching to the business sector helps companies better understand and support employees dealing with dependencies, spreading the lessons Kennedy learned the hard way. Working as motivational speakers allows Kennedy and Claire to share their story and help others. Remarkable openness about his struggles defines Kennedy's approach to advocacy. Detailed interviews about his drinking, his recovery, and how close he came to losing everything have helped combat the stigma around addiction and mental health, particularly in the workplace. Openness extends to something else Kennedy talks about freely. Returning to Coronation Street remains his dream. Every year since leaving in 2003, Kennedy has expressed interest in reprising his role as Curly Watts. 2009 brought statements that he'd consider a return, and by 2017, he admitted that every time Coronation Street gets a new producer, he makes a little inquiry. "No one would be more happy than me," he explained. "Curly has still got a lot of story to tell, and I have a great relationship with Granada." 2019 brought even more direct statements. "I'd love to go back. I am always being linked with a return. And of course, if they ask me, I'd be there. I adore the show. I still think it is the best soap on TV by miles." One chance to return came in 2010, 7 years after leaving the main show. Kennedy reprised the role for a direct-to-DVD film called Coronation Street: A Knight's Tale, a fantasy-themed comedy where Curly, now portrayed as a successful hotelier, organizes a medieval banquet. Reuniting with his old co-star Ken Morley, who played Reg Holdsworth, happened for the first time in 15 years. Viewers learned through this film that Curly's marriage to Emma hadn't survived their move to Newcastle because they'd split up. May of 2019 brought another glimmer of hope when reports suggested Curly might be returning to the main show. Kennedy responded excitedly on social media, but Coronation Street quickly denied the rumors, and producers confirmed there were no plans for Curly to return. 21 years have passed since Curly Watts left Weatherfield, and Kevin Kennedy has yet to make a permanent return to the show as of 2025. ITV has announced there are no plans to bring the character back, though the character got a mention as recently as December of 2024, when Leanne Battersby referenced the time her late father Les headbutted Curly all those years ago. That mention was just a reference to a character who exists in the past, nothing more. 64 years old now, Kevin Kennedy lives with over a quarter-century of sobriety behind him. Happily married to Claire, with whom he has 2 daughters, In addition to a son from his first marriage, he continues working in theater, advocating for dependency recovery, and helping others through his charity foundation. Philosophical gratitude defines how Kennedy talks about his time on Coronation Street. "I miss the people because I grew up with a lot of them," he's explained. "I also miss the job. I have no axe to grind. I originally joined for 4 episodes, and so 20 years work out of 4 episodes is very good going." That perspective tells you everything about Kennedy's journey. 4 episodes became 20 years. Near death became a quarter century of sobriety, and cancellation became a thriving theater career. Why Curly Watts left Coronation Street isn't a simple answer. Producers axed Kennedy because they felt the character had run its course, but that decision came 5 years after the real crisis. 5 years after the intervention that saved Kennedy's life. Sobriety, health, and readiness for new challenges defined him by the time he left in 2003, making the departure professional rather than personal. But the deeper truth lives in what Coronation Street did for Kennedy back in 1998. Choosing rehabilitation over termination in an era when addiction meant immediate dismissal saved their colleague rather than simply replacing him. That choice gave Kennedy his life back, gave him 25 years of sobriety, and gave him the chance to help countless others through his advocacy work. Curly Watts may never return to Coronation Street because after 21 years, the door seems firmly closed. Kevin Kennedy's legacy extends far beyond the cobbles of Weatherfield, though. Recovery is possible. Dependency doesn't have to destroy a career, and honesty about our struggles can help break down stigma and save lives. These truths define what Kennedy has proven through his journey. Curly Watts will always be remembered for his unlucky in love storylines, his awkward charm, and that iconic wedding that drew 22 million viewers. Kevin Kennedy deserves to be remembered for something even more important, though. Courage to confront his demons, willingness to accept help, and dedication to helping others find their own path to recovery define his real legacy. That's the truth Curly Watts finally revealed, and it's a truth worth sharing.